You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is this strange, unsolved case of Eleanor C. Parker, and this one has baffled for years. I mean, from a young missing girl to a strange witness statement to a possible connection to not one but two serial killers, this one gets extremely wild and confusing, and so you're really going to want to make sure that you are listening this entire time. By the way, I post Wednesdays and Sundays every single week true crime content, so if this is something that you are interested in, hearing these victims' stories, then please make sure to subscribe down below and give these videos a thumbs up just so I can see your support. So it was 1981 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Eleanor C. Parker was 18 years old. She had just graduated from Lee High School, and she had recently moved in with 3 female roommates into their own apartment because they were soon going to attend the Louisiana State University. This young woman had her whole life ahead of her. She had dreams that she was wanting to accomplish. She was just getting into the adult world, and she seemed ready for that. But unfortunately, in November of 1981, those dreams would never come to fruition because her life would suddenly halt, and her dreams would disappear with her. You see, Eleanor decided to stop by her parents' home in East Baton Rouge at the South Downs neighborhood to pick up some winter clothing. It was changing seasons and weather, getting colder out, and she needed some new winter clothes to bring to her apartment. So she stopped there. She stayed briefly, but it was already almost evening and she wanted to get home, so she didn't stay there for long before heading back to her car, throwing the clothes she had taken from her parents' home into the car, getting in and driving towards her apartment, which was on Gardere Lane. Eleanor's apartment and her parents' home were approximately 11 minutes away from each other, but Eleanor never made it back to the apartment. And when people realized, she was called in as a missing person, and the police came and searched the surrounding area around her apartment for approximately 20 miles. Still, they found no trace of Eleanor, and that is when the missing persons posters came out saying that there was a white female, 18 years old, with dark blonde or brown hair and blue eyes that had disappeared. Eleanor was 5'5", 110 pounds, and last seen wearing a matching maroon tweed skirt, blouse, and blazer, and maroon suede boots. And she was driving a 1975 Maverick. Foul play was immediately suspected, and there was a reward posted of $10,000 for anyone who had any information regarding her disappearance. They began interviewing hundreds of different people in this case, but there was no evidence, no body, no clues, and they were going off of pretty much nothing. And that is when a tip came in from one of Eleanor's former classmates that was the strangest thing in the world, but was the only thing they now had to go on. This classmate of Eleanor's claimed that she had seen Eleanor on November 14th at the Cortana Mall. The problem with this was that was 4 days after Eleanor supposedly disappeared, and this classmate was saying that she was fine at this mall and wearing blue jeans and a Lee High School shirt with a football in the center. A completely different outfit than she had been last seen in. This mall was approximately 19 minutes from her parents' home where she had left, but this sighting has never and will never really be confirmed, and nobody knew if this classmate was telling the truth, why they would lie about it. Days went by with no sightings of Eleanor, no clues in her case, and then a week went by, then a week and a day, and on November 18th, another clue came in that was the biggest they had in the case, and that was because Eleanor's car had been found. It was a 1975 Ford Maverick, and it was parked alongside the road on 17th Street and North 17th Street outside of Gold Chalks. I know I'm probably saying that wrong. It was an old department store back in that time, and she was parked outside of it, or at least her car was. And the thing was, Eleanor worked at this department store as a store clerk, but Eleanor was nowhere around this car or the store. When they began to investigate this possible crime scene, they found that it probably was not one, because there was no sign of struggle anywhere around this car, and inside it was just as clean as out. There was no blood, no fingerprints, no weapon, and no Eleanor. And then when they went around to the trunk to open it, that's when they found something odd. And like I said, this case has many very odd features to it. They opened the trunk and they found a pile of Eleanor's clothes folded, just neatly sitting there, folded. By this point, everyone in Eleanor's life was being polygraphed and interviewed and ticked off one by one as not being involved, but there was no one that they were sure of that was involved, and they still had no idea where Eleanor was. And that is when rumors began flying that possibly it was a serial killer named Derrick Todd Lee. But these rumors only came about after he was caught many years later. You see, Derrick was known as the Baton Rouge serial killer between 1992 and 2003, killing approximately 7 women. And although he didn't have a set MO that they could base, her victim profile off of, they did know that he had a knack for not showing any signs of forced entry. But the big problem was they believed he had started murdering 11 years after Eleanor disappeared. So could it be possible that 11 years prior to when his first victim supposedly was, he had started and nobody knew? Looking into his background and going through Derrick's life, he had started his days of crime very, very early. I mean, as a preteen, he was burglarizing, he was peeping, and he even assaulted a woman who told his mother that he had been peeping on her. And apparently he even killed the family dog. By the time he was 16, he was actually arrested for second-degree murder or intentional murder without it being premeditated. But he was eventually released because there was no connection that they could find, and he also had a strong alibi. Throughout the years, Derrick would be arrested for things like burglary and peeping, but he was never jailed for too long. He always seemed to have a way with the court system and getting out with very little punishment, if any. And what investigators did not know is that all the while they were letting him out, thinking that he was just doing this petty crime, people were disappearing, and it was because of him. Because in 1998, a 28-year-old woman named Randy Mabrewer disappeared while her 3-year-old slept in their house, and she was sexually assaulted and stabbed to death, but unfortunately her body was never found. Then in 2001, 39-year-old Gina Wilson Green was sexually assaulted in her home and then strangled, and she was found by her coworker who came by after work to see if she was okay. Then in 2001, 21-year-old Geraldine DeSoto was stabbed and her throat was cut to almost the point of decapitation, and her husband found her when he came home from work that day. A few months later, in 2002, 22-year-old Charlotte Pace was assaulted in her home and stabbed with a screwdriver 83 times. 2 months later, Pamela Kennemore disappeared from her home, and her body was found 2 days later, where she had been assaulted and almost to the point of decapitation as well. 4 months later, 23-year-old Tanisha Cullum disappeared from where she was grieving her mother at her grave, and she was found 3 days later assaulted and beaten to death. Then in 2003, Carrie Lynn Yoder disappeared from her home and was found 10 days later, assaulted and strangled. All but Tanisha were white women with brown hair, and all the while the police were looking for a white suspect. They believed the man doing this was a white male, but after an assault in 2002, they realized they could have been very wrong. A woman named Diane Alexander was assaulted on July 9th of 2002, and the only reason she survived was that her son walked in while this intruder was assaulting his mother, and he chased the assaulter out of the house. Eventually, Diane came in and did a sketch for them of a black male And that is when they sent the sketch out all over, have them see the possible suspect as a black male instead of a white male, because this drastically changed who people were looking for. And fortunately, another police department came forward saying that this looked exactly like a man that they had previously arrested for peeping. They contacted this other department with his name, and thankfully they found that they also had this man's DNA, because in the first murder we talked about with Randy, he had been a prime suspect, and they had gotten his DNA for that but didn't have anything to match it to in that case. But now they did. His DNA was a match to these other murder scenes, and he was convicted in 2004 of murdering Geraldine DeSoto and Charlotte Pace. And unfortunately, the others didn't have any DNA evidence to match him exactly to their cases, but he was convicted of the two. He was given the death sentence. So his murders were supposedly starting in 1998, but some believed that he started in 1992 with a woman named Connie Warner, who lived only a block away from his first victim, Randy. So does this mean he could have started even earlier than 1992 and 1981? With Eleanor? The only problem with this theory that this Derrick Todd Lee killed Eleanor Parker is that he was only 13 at the time she disappeared. Now, I always like to say that if they're going to start, they start sometime, and so they can start as kids, and it's not a crazy thing. He was already showing signs of killing animals, of burglarizing, of peeping, and maybe he took his chance with this, little 18-year-old girl who probably just took him as an innocent boy, and, if he asked her to help him with something, he could have possibly lured her somewhere. It would be a little harder, a little bit more difficult for him to get her in a place in an environment where nobody saw or nobody heard, but if he could have done that, he possibly could have been strong enough to hurt her. I wouldn't discount him just because he was 13 at the time, although it would be a little more difficult. The only thing I see with this is, how does a 13-year-old discard of a body without anybody knowing what happened? That would be my only thing on, him getting away with it for so long. But unfortunately, Derrick died in 2016 of heart disease, so we may never know if he was actually involved in Eleanor's case. But there was another serial killer in the area at the time of Eleanor's disappearance, unfortunately, and so we're going to be talking about him next. Because Sean Vincent Gillis was stalking, murdering, mutilating, kidnapping women between 1994 and 2004. And unlike Eric, he grew up seeming very normal. Sean's mother said that he was like her blue-eyed little angel, and that's what she always called him. But in 1994, Sean was murdering an 81-year-old named Ann Bryan and stabbing her 50 times before almost decapitating her. And then in January of 1999, Catherine Hall was found murdered and strangled with what appeared to be a necktie, and she was found dead under a dead-end sign. But in Catherine's mouth there was actually a pubic hair that still had a root attached to it, meaning they could find the DNA from it. But when they tested this DNA in the system, they had no matches. Fast forward to May 1999, when Sean murdered a woman named Hardy Smith, who was 52 years old and going on a jog when he attacked her, and she was found floating in a body of water, nude. Later in 1999, 36-year-old Joyce Williams was found murdered with a saw mark on her femur. January of 2002, 52-year-old Lillian Robinson was found murdered, and then that October, 38-year-old Marilyn Nevels. In 2003, 45-year-old Johnny Mae Williams was found with her hands cut off at the wrists. A hair was found at her crime scene, and then in 2004, a woman named Donna Benet Johnson was found in a drainage canal. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled with a nylon tie wrap, her breasts were slashed, her left nipple cut off, her tattoo gouged out of her left thigh, and her left arm severed at the elbow. Her fingerprints had DNA underneath them from where she scratched the assaulter, and this connected it back to Catherine Hall's murder and to Johnny May's, and so they all knew that they were one killer, but it was still no one in the database. Then in the last case of Donna Johnston, they found tire tracks at the crime scene, and fortunately for them, these were a very rare type of tires, and only 90 had been purchased in the Baton Rouge area. So they went one by one to these people, asking them for DNA swabs, and that's when they came to Sean Gillis, and they asked him about Donna and said, you know, do you know her? And he admitted yes, he knew her, and also that he had been in that area where they found the car tracks around the same time. When they were talking to him, they talked to him for a very long time because they had a feeling he was their guy, but he was not coming forward saying that he did it. And so they were talking to him a lot about it, and something that they noticed was that he would always say that, oh, he didn't want to see the photos, that was just kind of disgusting, and that was not for him to look at it. And so with him focusing on that so much, they decided to ask him about if he had ever seen any crime scene photos, if he had seen anything on the internet that was interesting, and he was a very talkative guy at this point, saying that he found Jeffrey Dahmer fun and dismemberment fascinating. And that is when everything started coming together. His DNA eventually came back as a match, and they found 45 pictures of Donna's body where she had been mutilated on his computer, as well as other victims. He was found guilty of the murders of Catherine Hall, Johnny Williams, and Donna Johnston, and sentenced to life in prison, and he even pled guilty to Joyce Williams' murder. Sean would have been 19 years old when Eleanor went missing, and I do find that he is the more likely of the two. Sean didn't have a set MO as far as what the victims looked like. It could have been a possibility that they were around the same age. Eleanor was 18, he was 19. Could he have possibly been seeing Eleanor at the time and nobody knew about it, and he did something far darker than anyone could have imagined for him at the time, for people who described him as an angel? But in Sean's case, he told them about even more victims than the police had originally. They only had the ones that they connected to him with through DNA, but he was telling them about more and more people that he had murdered, and he even said, if there were more, I would tell you. So would he have told them about Eleanor, or was that something that he always wanted to keep a secret? And Sean is still alive today, and the sergeant at the Baton Rouge Police Department wants to revisit Eleanor's case completely. This sergeant said that after looking over Eleanor's case, he believes that some people interviewed at the time knew where she was, or where she had been, or where she was going at that time, and would possibly know where she is or was today. Some of the theories also involve that possibly her roommates were involved. I mean, did they know where she was at the time? Did they know if she was seeing anyone? Did Eleanor possibly have a stalker that she was talking about at the time, or a boyfriend that they didn't tell police about? Or possibly were they covering something up? It seems to me that her roommates would have been the ones who would have called her in as missing, because if she was heading from her parents' house back to what they presumed was the apartment, because that was the way she was going, you would think that the roommates would be the ones who would call her in as missing, unless the parents called her that evening to see if she got home and she didn't answer. But anyways, the roommates would have then talked to the parents that she wasn't there, and I can't find anywhere who initially called. And it's just strange that it was 4 days later when this other classmate said that they saw her, but she was reported missing 4 days earlier. Did somebody report her missing early, and if so, why? And how in the world would they do that unless they were covering some crazy plan up? Or maybe it was this classmate who said that they saw her. Was that person looked into? That's not really talked about at all. Something I really want to know was her car at her work the entire time? How fast did they actually look there? Because they found it a week and a day afterwards. You would think that that would be one of the first places that they would look, because that's where she worked. And if they did check her work, was it not there at first and then there afterwards? I would love to know that. Something very important that needed to be told, and I hope that they have it somewhere in their files, is what were the clothes that were neatly folded in her trunk? Was it the winter clothes she brought from her parents' house? Was it the maroon outfit she was in? Was it the outfit that the classmates said that they saw her in? I would just love to know, because that could tell us which was actually the last outfit she was seen in, or give us even more clues as to when the last time she was by her car would have been. Because was it even her that parked her car there? We don't know. Something is just very, very fishy about Eleanor's case, and I just feel like, you know, the sergeant did say that he felt like people interviewed were holding back. They knew more than they said. And I hope that they do eventually reopen this and look into those people, and hopefully some people are still alive that are connected to this case. But I do really just hope that Eleanor just kind of left her life and wanted to live a better one somewhere else, and that she's just happily living somewhere at around 50 years old today. But her family does deserve to know what happened to her, so if you know any information, please call the Crime Stoppers at 225-344-7867. But what do you believe happened to Eleanor C. Parker? If you think it was one of these serial killers, if you think it was possibly someone closer to her, possibly an old classmate, or just someone who has never been caught. And don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay,